The journey through the sleeping villages. Departure on a golden afternoon. I still remember that day as if the memory had been wrapped in honey and tucked away in some quiet corner of my mind. The sky was a soft golden cloth, stretched lazily from one horizon to the other. The breeze drifted through my open window, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and distant rain. I sat at my old wooden table, staring at the small huadkis resting near my feet. There wasn't much packed inside. Just a few warm clothes, a faded leather notebook, and an old camera whose lens had seen more sunsets than most people ever would. There was no plan, no clear destination, just a quiet longing, a simple wish to leave the noise, the rush, the invisible weight that had built up over the years in the city. For too long, I had lived among the endless hum of traffic, the harsh glow of neon lights, and the hurried faces that barely looked up anymore. I missed the sound of real birdsong. I missed the smell of earth after a good rain. I missed sitting quietly with strangers who didn't feel the need to fill the silence with small talk. And so, on that golden afternoon, I closed the door behind me, locked it with a quiet click, and made my way down the sleepy street toward the little bus station at the end of town. The bus was already there, a faded yellow thing, looking just as tired as the evening itself. Its windows were streaked with dust, and its paint had long surrendered to the slow work of the sun. I climbed aboard, handed the old driver a few crumpled bills, and said simply, "Take me somewhere far from here." The driver, a man with hair as white as the first winter frost, peered at me over his thick glasses and chuckled. "Far's a long way, son," he said, his voice gravelly but kind. "You sure your heart's packed for it?" I smiled faintly and nodded. The bus rumbled to life, coughing and grumbling like a giant waking from a nap. We pulled away from the station, and I watched the city fall behind us. The buildings shrinking like toys, the streets turning into thin ribbons, the noise fading into a distant hum. Fields rolled past the windows, golden and soft under the setting sun. Occasionally, a cluster of trees would drift by, their leaves whispering secrets to the passing wind. In the seat behind me, a small boy was dozing off, his head bobbing with each bump in the road. Farther back, an elderly woman knitted silently, her hands moving as if guided by a memory rather than her eyes. No one spoke. There was no need. The only sounds were the steady hum of the engine and the low sighing of the tires on the cracked old road. The world outside blurred into gentle shapes and colors, a watercolor painting melting into twilight. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, feeling the vibrations of the road hum against my temple. My eyelids grew heavier with each passing mile. The journey had just begun. And somewhere out there, beyond the fields and rivers and forgotten fences, the first sleeping village waited. And so I drifted, between waking and dreaming, between what was and what could be, the first village, Whispering Gardens. When I woke, the bus had already pulled off the main road. We bumped along a narrow dirt path, flanked by tall hedges and crooked wooden fences. The sun was dipping low now, painting everything with that rich, syrupy light you only see once in a great while, a kind of light that makes even the smallest things look sacred. I sat up, stretching the stiffness from my neck. Outside the window, a hand-painted sign leaned sideways in the grass. "Welcome to Willowbrook." It wasn't much of a village, just a handful of houses with weathered shingles, a small general store, and a church whose bell tower tilted slightly, like it had grown tired of standing straight. The bus wheezed to a stop near a tiny park where a few children chased each other under the sleepy eyes of their grandparent. I stepped off, my boots crunching softly on the gravel. The driver tipped his hat and said, You'll find what you're looking for here if you listen close enough." Then, with a puff of diesel smoke and a low groan, the bus rumbled away, leaving me standing alone. I slung my bag over my shoulder and wandered down the main street, if you could even call it that. It was more like a wide lane lined with oak trees whose branches leaned toward each other, whispering secrets across the way. The scent of something baking drifted on the air, warm and sweet, like apples and cinnamon. I followed my nose until I found a little bakery, its windows fogged up from the ovens inside. A bell jingled overhead as I pushed the door open. Behind the counter stood a woman who looked like she belonged to the village itself, silver hair twisted into a loose bun, flour dusting her apron, a smile that crinkled the corners of her bright eyes. "Afternoon, stranger," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "Passing through?" "Maybe," I said, smiling back. "Maybe staying a while." She nodded like she understood perfectly, then handed me a warm apple turnover without asking if I wanted one. "First one's always on the house," she said. I took a bite, and the flaky crust practically melted on my tongue. It tasted like something I'd been missing without even knowing it. Outside, the world slowed down to a comfortable hum. The kids in the park were still laughing, though their voices were softer now, like even their games had grown sleepy. A breeze stirred the leaves, sending little golden flurries tumbling through the air. I found a bench under a great big willow tree and sat there finishing my turnover, letting the day sink deep into my bones. In Willowbrook, everything moved slower. People talked slower, smiled longer, listened better. Even the shadows seemed to stretch and yawn like lazy cats across the cobblestone paths. I realized then that the driver had been right. Sometimes, if you listen close enough, you find exactly what your soul's been longing for. And that night, in a tiny inn with creaky floors and quilts that smelled faintly of lavender, I slept deeper than I had in years. A Carpenter's Tale. The morning came gently. No alarms, no buzzing phones, no rumble of garbage trucks like back in the city. Just the soft creak of the inn settling on its old bones, the distant clatter of pots in the kitchen downstairs, and the so lazy song of sparrows hopping along the windowsill. I stretched under the heavy quilt and just listened for a while, breathing in the quiet. When I finally wandered down to the lobby, the innkeeper, a kindly man with suspenders stretched over his rounded belly, was setting out a simple breakfast: fresh bread, a crock of butter, and a pot of black coffee that smelled like it could wake even the sleepiest dreamer. "Sleep all right?" he asked with a knowing smile. "Better than I have in years," I said. He chuckled. "That's Willowbrook for you. It knows how to mend a tired soul." After breakfast, I tucked my notebook into my jacket pocket and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The village was already stirring, an old woman sweeping her porch, a dog trotting down the lane with important business on his mind, a few men unloading lumber from the back of a battered pickup. Curious, I wandered toward the commotion. The lumber was being carried into a workshop, a low, broad building with wide double doors thrown open to the morning sun. Inside, the smell of sawdust and linseed oil was thick and sweet, the scent of things made with hands and heart. At the center of it all was a man who seemed built from the same timber he worked with, sturdy, steady, with hands like worn leather, and a slow, thoughtful way of moving. He looked up as I approached and gave me a nod, the kind of nod that said, "You're welcome here if you mind your manners." "Morning," I said. "Morning," he rumbled back. "Come to watch or come to help?" I laughed. I wouldn't know which end of a hammer to hold. He grinned, setting down the plank he was smoothing. "Watching's fine then." I stepped inside, breathing in the warm, woody air. All around the shop were pieces in various stages of creation. Rocking chairs with graceful curves, sturdy tables with thick legs, tiny carved animals waiting to be painted. The carpenter picked up a block of cedar and began shaping it with a small, sharp plane. The wood curled away from the blade in delicate ribbons, piling up like a little nest at his feet. "Name's Eli," he said after a while, not looking up from his work. "Jack," I said. "Well, Jack," Eli said, "around here, we believe every piece of wood's got a story in it. Our job's just to set it free." I smiled at that, the simple truth of it. He worked in easy silence for a few minutes, then spoke again, his voice low and stum like a slow-moving river. "Used to be 100 of us carpenters around here," he said. "Now it's just me and a couple of stubborn old friends." "What happened?" I asked. Eli shrugged. "World got faster. People wanted things quicker, cheaper, plastic instead of oak, screws instead of dovetails. But me?" He paused, running a calloused hand over the smooth surface of the cedar. "I figure good things take their time, like chairs that hold up under generations of laughter, or a house built strong enough to outlast a few storms." I found myself nodding without realizing it. Outside, a boy pedaled past on a rusty bicycle, his dog barking happily in pursuit. The sun had climbed higher, laying soft beams across the dusty floor. Eli set down his tools and leaned against the workbench, wiping his hands on a rag. "You're not from here," he said, more statement than question. "No," I admitted, "just passing through, trying to remember how to breathe, I guess." Eli chuckled, a deep, warm sound. "Well, you picked a good place for it." He reached behind the bench and pulled out a small carving. A simple thing, really, just a tiny wooden bird with outstretched wings. "Here," he said, handing it to me, "for the road." I turned it over in my hand. It was light, but somehow solid, like it carried a little piece of the village inside it. "Thank you," I said, truly meaning it. Eli just nodded, already turning back to his next piece of work. I slipped the little bird into my pocket and stepped back into the street, feeling somehow lighter, as if a few of the stones I'd been carrying had fallen away without me even noticing. The road stretched ahead, winding between cottages and gardens heavy with late summer blooms. And somewhere down that road, the next village waited, dreaming its own quiet dreams. A river that remembers. The road out of Willowbrook was little more than a dusty path, edged with tall grasses that swayed like old friends waving goodbye. I walked slowly, no real hurry in my step, feeling the sun warm against my back and the cool weight of the wooden bird in my pocket. The world around me was unhurried, generous with its silence. No rush, no ticking clocks, just the easy shuffle of my boots on the dirt and the occasional flutter of sparrows darting between the hedgerows. A couple of miles down the road, the path dipped into a small valley, and there it was, a wide, lazy river glittering under the afternoon sun like a ribbon of silk. The River Hollow, they called it. At least, that's what the hand-painted sign nailed to an old oak tree said, its letters faded but still proud. The river curved and twisted like it had nowhere particular to be. Tall willows leaned out over the water, their fingers just brushing the surface, and the air smelled of clean mud, wildflowers, and something sweet I couldn't quite name. Maybe honeysuckle, maybe just the memory of it. There was a little dock jutting out into the water, half sunken and crooked, like it had been forgotten by the busy hands that once built it. Next to it sat an old man in overalls and a wide-brimmed hat, a fishing pole balanced loosely between his knees. He didn't seem too concerned whether he caught anything. As I approached, he gave a slow nod, as if he had been expecting me all along. "Afternoon," he drawled, his voice as easy as the river itself. "Afternoon," I replied, sitting down a respectful few feet away. For a while, we just sat there together, saying nothing, watching the way the sunlight danced on the ripples. After a long spell of comfortable silence, he said, "This river remembers, you know." I glanced at him, waiting. He tapped his fishing pole gently against the dock. "All rivers do, but this one, she's special. She don't just remember the big things. She holds on to the small ones too. First kisses under the willow trees, promises whispered on summer nights, laughter that drifted over the water and never quite left." I looked out over the river, imagining it carrying all those forgotten moments, swirling them gently beneath its surface, keeping them safe. "My father used to bring me here," the old man said after a while, his voice softer now. "Used to fish right from this dock, back when it was straight and proud." He chuckled, a sound full of fondness and a little sadness. "He told me if you sat real quiet, real still, you could hear the river telling its stories." I closed my eyes for a moment, listening. The wind moved through the reeds with a soft sigh. The water lapped against the dock with a slow, patient rhythm. Somewhere upstream, a heron called, its voice low and ancient. And beneath it all, if you listened just right, there was a feeling, almost too faint to name, like the river itself breathing through time. The old man pulled in his line. No fish, but he didn't seem disappointed. "People think memories live in our heads," he said, standing with a soft grunt. "But the best ones, the real ones, they live out here in the trees, the water, the stones we walk across every day without even noticing." He picked up a battered tackle box, tipped his hat to me, and wandered off up a side path, whistling a tune that sounded older than any song I knew. I stayed behind watching the river for a long time. And when I finally rose to leave, I bent down and picked up a smooth, flat stone from the dock. It was warm from the sun, solid in my hand. Without thinking too hard about it, I skipped it across the water. 1, 2, 3 perfect skips before it sank with a soft, final plop. "A new memory," whispered into the river. Smiling to myself, I turned back to the path and kept walking. The road would take me farther yet, to new villages, new faces, new stories. But part of me, I knew, would always drift here, tucked gently beneath the water's slow, remembering flow. The orchard keeper, the sun hung low behind me, stretching my shadow long across the winding road. My legs ached pleasantly from the day's walk, and the air had turned cooler, carrying the rich scent of earth and ripening fruit. Around the next bend, I saw it, a wide orchard, rows upon rows of gnarled old apple trees, standing like quiet sentries. Their branches sagged heavy with fat red apples, and the leaves whispered together like old women trading secrets. At the edge of the orchard stood a small farmhouse, paint peeling, roof sagging but alive, the way some places hum with the lives that fill them. Leaning against the front porch rail was a woman, maybe in her 60s, wearing a faded denim jacket and a straw hat pulled low over her eyes. She watched me approach with a kind of calm curiosity, as if travelers passing by were just another season to mark. "You look like you could use a rest," she called out, her voice kind, with the rough edges of a lifelong smoker. "I wouldn't say no," I admitted, tipping my hat. She waved me up onto the porch without ceremony and disappeared inside, returning with a chipped mug of cold apple cider, the glass sweating in the evening air. I took it gratefully, the first sip sweet and tart, cutting the dust of the road from my throat. "Name's June," she said, settling into a rocking chair that creaked under her. "This here orchard's been in my family since before any of us can remember." I introduced myself and sat down opposite her, the porch boards warm beneath me. We rocked together in easy silence for a while, the creak of the chairs matching the gentle breeze through the trees. "Not much reason to stay," June said after a bit. "Kids all moved to the cities. Folks these days, they want shinier apples from shinier stores. Don't want to climb a ladder and pick their own anymore." There was no bitterness in her voice, just a kind of quiet resignation, the way a river accepts a fallen branch in its way. "But I stay," she said, taking a long sip from her own mug. "Someone's got to remember how it all tasted when it was still wild, how sweet things were before they got polished up and packaged neat." The sky deepened into a soft violet, and the first stars blinked awake, timid at first, then bolder. Fireflies lit up in the orchard, tiny lanterns weaving lazy patterns between the trees. "You know," June said, leaning forward like she was sharing a secret, "some nights I think the trees remember too. They hold on to the laughter, the barefoot races, the sticky little hands reaching for one more apple." I smiled, warmed by her words and the cider alike. June leaned back, her chair creaking a slow lullaby. "You're welcome to camp out here if you want," she offered. "Plenty of space, and the stars don't charge rent." I thanked her, set up my little tent under a low-branched apple tree, and watched as the world softened into night, where the roads lead. That night, lying on my back under a quilt of stars, I realized something. I hadn't come to these villages looking for stories. I'd come because I had forgotten something vital, something these sleepy towns and quiet rivers and weathered orchards still remembered. How to move slowly, how to sit still long enough for the world to whisper its secrets, how to listen not with ears, but with a heart willing to be quiet. The road would call again tomorrow. It always does. New places, new face, more lessons tucked into unexpected corners. But for now, under that wide country sky, I simply breathed. And for the first time in a long, long while. If you enjoyed this peaceful journey through the sleeping villages, why not leave a like and subscribe for more stories to help you unwind and drift off? Share this video with someone who could use a little calm tonight. And remember, sometimes the best adventures are the quiet ones we take in our hearts. See you in the next story.